Hello, BookTube. Well, as you can see, I have a guest here at Hyde Cottage.
Hello,
Uh,
BookTube.
this is Hannah from Hannah's Books, and if you don't know, you should go and subscribe to her channel if I remember, or if you remind me.
Hannah's Books.
We can link to her channel down below. Uh, and of course, there's the bean. I've got this blinding white light behind me because she's not always in that spot. Let's Maybe. How are you doing? I'm afraid there'll be no Pita yoga this time around because you have to do it straight onto my guest. But, oh my God! All right, there's the three of us. One of us has read all of Edgar Rice Burroughs. One of us has read none of Edgar Rice Burroughs, and one of us doesn't read at all. But I have a tag that we're going to do today. I thought it would be fun. An old tag. I just recently did it with my friend Sam on a video. It's the ultimate book tag. But these are great questions, so I thought we'd just go through them anyway. No idea what the bean is going to do. She's a little bit unpredictable when I have a human guest, but we'll see. You going to behave yourself, baby? So let's start off with question number one. Do you get sick when you read in the car? Do you get motion sickness?
I do, and it's always been a disappointment, but that's the one place that I can do audiobooks.
Audiobooks doesn't cause that.
Audiobooks.
Is that true for the rest of you? Those of you who get car sickness if you read, do you get an exemption for audiobooks? And what?
Well, I'm not an audiobook fan overall, but in the car that helps.
What about other forms of motion? Does it happen on planes?
It does.
Or trains?
It's not nearly
Wow.
as bad on planes, but or trains that are really smooth. But the rougher it is, the terrain is, the more it is.
Interesting. Now, what about the rest of you? If you have car sickness, if you read, does it happen on other forms of transportation as well? I guess it would, right? Is it something to do with the inner ear? Something to do with the sense of motion that, as I mentioned now in this tag about 4 times, it doesn't happen to me at all. Question number 2: which author's writing style is completely unique to you, and why?
So, what does unique to you mean?
Haven't the foggiest. Pretty sure the 13-year-old who made this tag 10 years ago didn't know what it meant either.
Something that
Baby,
fits.
what are you doing? Oh my God. Oh, it's W.C. Fields. It's the revenge of W.C. Fields. Never work with animals or children. She's totally upstaging us both. Oh my God, baby. Of course, I would apologize, but they're not paying attention to anything that we're doing. They only care about the baby. Do you want to come down here, little girl? Is that it? You're going to land straight on the human. Here, Frida, come over here. Come over to this side. There you go. Come down here. Come down here. Oh, baby, what are you doing? Oh, God, I've got a full-blown crisis here. Baby, what are you doing? Here, come over here. Down there you go. There you go.
Well, if it means what authors fit with your style, maybe.
Well, what about if we can adapt as we go along? Because we've got trolls and zombies to deal with as well. So we're going to have to do some question adapting as we go along.
Yeah,
so let's adapt it as if the question were posed by an adult. Let's say this. What is your favorite author who employs an extremely weird style? An unconventional style? Do you have any authors you really like that don't read like any other author?
I was thinking about an author that has a very conventional style, but has a conventional style that's so specifically mine that it might be more unique to me than to other people.
All right.
And that's Margaret Winkle. And I read Late Migration. For the history here is that for years, my husband and I read aloud to each other. We started this before we were even dating. And I read a lot to him this year and read Margaret Winkle out, and it was like I was reading my own writing. Her cadence was exactly mine, and her rhythm, even the words she was choosing, were so related to.
You read to each other before you were dating?
We did.
So you were, both of you, full-blown card-carrying nerds, right from the beginning.
Yeah. Although he was not a bookish nerd until I got my paws into it.
Or what about my adaptation, though? That's Madeline. I would never thought
Something
of that.
weird.
But what about my adaptation? What is the most rhetorically unconventional author that you nevertheless like? Like in my world, it would be something like Dennis Cooper, or even Samuel Delany at some points in his career. Do you like any authors who pull hijinks?
I tend not to like when I feel like someone's playing a trick on me, but yeah, I do like more adventurous writers or more experimental writers. I like Faulkner, for example. But I think when the kind of experimental nature is stuff that's been going on for 100 years, it's perhaps a little bit less experimental at this point.
I tell you, BookTube, I intentionally invite these big brains into my house, and this is the kind of crap I get as a result.
No, it's just that I haven't read enough to give any more contemporary answers.
All right, let's forge on here. Oh, God help us. All right, number 3 is Harry Potter or the Twilight Saga. Give 3 points to defend your answer. Of course, I'm naturally curious to know if you've read anything of either.
Yeah.
You had a kid.
Yeah, I've read all of Harry Potter more than once.
Because of Abe?
No.
No, not because
Well, in a sense, because of Abe. Immediately after Abe was born, my first venture out of the house was to Barnes & Noble with David and his parents who were visiting them. And David picked up the first American copy of the first book. And I had not even heard of it before, but he had. And he picked it up, and as he was holding sleeping Abe, he was teeny, he read the first chapter and loved it, and he bought the book. And so the two of us read it aloud together, and both really enjoyed it. It took me longer to get into it. The first couple of chapters, David was sure it was the right book, and it really does work well as a read aloud, as many children's books do. And then we proceeded to read all of them as they came out. In the later stages, they were way too advanced for where Abe was, so we had to read it to each other after Abe went to sleep. So yeah, but I've never read Twilight.
No Twilight?
No, I never read Twilight. So yes, I loved the first couple of books. I was not so keen on the later ones.
Did you finish Harry Potter? You read them all?
I read them all.
Wow.
I think I might have stopped if it hadn't become a family tradition of reading them aloud to each other.
You're not missing anything with Twilight.
So I hear.
Not really. On page 3 of Twilight, we are told how gorgeous the male lead character is. Then on page 7, then on page 13, then on page 16, then on page 21, then on page 22, then 3 or 4 times on page 25. It literally goes on for the whole book, over and over and over and over again. Yeah. And it just gets worse from there. So, all right, so we're going to say Harry Potter. We'll give that to Harry Potter. Question number 4. Do you carry a book bag? If so, what's in it besides books?
Actually, I have a book bag right over there that has my pajamas in it and my toothbrush.
Overnight visit to Hyde Cottage.
Overnight visit.
The David Murphy Memorial Cot.
It also has a couple of tote bags in case we manage to get to the Brattle tomorrow. But yes, I always have a book bag with me.
And
usually it has a book in it.
And other things.
And other things, yeah.
Do you carry writing with you? Something to write?
I usually have a pencil with me because I write in books. So I usually have a little pad so I can take notes. Sometimes I have my very small calendar. It's just so I know what is up if I'm going for a longer period.
Ever more than one book?
Yes. For my entire life, I've carried too many books and too much knitting because I'm always afraid that if I'm going for more than a certain amount of time, that I might finish the book and then I would have nothing to read. And of course, I find books wherever I go, not quite as well as you do, but...
What about an e-reader? No.
Yeah, usually I have my Kindle, but
yes.
I'm always afraid that the Kindle is going to break somehow, and that therefore I have to have a paper book just as backup. So yeah, I carry
and
too much.
Just for my own sake here, none of the rest of you care, but you all know that it's on my mind. What kind of Kindle?
Paperweight, just a very simple paperweight. And in fact, I did not bring an extra book today because I knew that the place where I was going had plenty of books to read.
There are plenty of books here. Very few people come to Hyde Cottage and leave without books. Question number 5 is, do you smell your books?
I would prefer not to. Yeah. Actually, I'm not a very allergic person, but I do have a fairly significant book mold allergy. And as a history grad student at a time before archives were primarily online, I spent lots of time in archives reading 19th century documents, either letters or diaries or whatever. And
that must have been a nightmare.
It was a nightmare. Not all of them. Some particular archives just did not take care of the book mold very well, and so I would feel really ill. So yes, I don't want to smell my books. Although if they're leather bound, sometimes they can have something of a scent, I guess.
Yeah, I think the question usually refers to that old musty smell, which people always say, well, I don't like book mold, I like that old musty smell. That old musty smell is book mold.
Well, the old leathery smell I like.
Oh, okay.
The musty smell, not so much.
Well, the next question is, do you like books with illustrations or without? I'm sure that there's any human being on Earth who likes books without illustrations. So what's your relationship with illustrations?
I don't mind I love illustrations in children's books. I love the kind of sketches that are in Victorian books, in very small amount. I really like the NCYF paintings that are interspersed occasionally. I don't do so well with comic books
actual graphic novels.
Or graphic novels.
Okay.
Because I get so distracted from the story by the artwork.
Yeah.
Rather than supporting it, it feels like it's.
If you've been trained from childhood to understand panel work like that, then it won't bother you so much. But otherwise, I don't know anybody who comes to it late that is really totally comfortable with it, including the last person to do this tag with me. Let's see here. Question number 7. What book did you love while reading, but discovered later that it wasn't quality writing?
Wasn't quality
right
writing?
On the doorstep of Garb August here. So, is there anything that you read and really loved that you went back and realized was trash?
I wouldn't say I've never loved anything that was trash, but I don't think I ever thought something was not trash and then discovered that it was trash.
Typically, the problem here would be youth.
Yeah.
Like, did you read Animorphs books and think that they were the greatest thing in the world? Or...
I read Jane Eyre and Thomas Wolfe, and I was one of those. I have changed my taste periodically, though. So there are books that I really
but never
loved.
For that reason.
Not because they were poorly written, but because what appeals to me sometimes changes. I used to really love Jeanette Winterson's The Passion, or 100 Years of Solitude, or books like that with that very lush language, very self-consciously written, beautiful writing. And right now I'm in a stage where I really like people who can tell a very meaningful story, or even give really evocative descriptions in very plain prose. So Marilyn Robinson, or I've just been rereading Mary Cather, and I think she's got that controlled language that doesn't call attention to itself. And so, I suspect I will go back and really love lush writing at times. I certainly don't think of it as garbage. but it does, they do appeal at different times in my life, I think.
The original author of the tag notes as a parenthetical that they may have been wrong in their original estimation of Twilight. So somebody's done some growing up in the last 10 years. But let's see here. Question number 8. Do you have any funny stories involving books from your childhood? These sorts of things leave me out completely. My childhood friends and I ate books. We didn't read them.
Well, I loved books as a kid. Actually, every time I'm contemplating funny stories about books in childhood, I think of my own kid as opposed to my own childhood. when he was young, he loved to pick up whatever book was on my nightstand, which was often academic history or whatever, and he would run his finger, it was before he could read, he would run his finger under the words and trace the language and make up a story as if he were reading it aloud. And it was just so wonderful to hear these. And then one day when I was trying to meet a deadline for writing a paper, and I was writing on my laptop, and he was writing next to me, I gave him a bunch of pieces of typing paper, and he had picked up his crayon, a pale yellow crayon, and started scribbling in what looked kind of like handwriting, just line after line after line. And so after I finished my work, he was happily finishing up his paper, and he handed it to me and said, "Would you read me the story?" And I had no idea how to read a story. and at some point I made some comment like, well, the very pale yellow definitely makes it hard. And then at some point I said, I just can't quite read your handwriting. Get me started. And so he did, and I sort of understood what his topic was, and therefore just started making up a story like he did.
Do children, I could swear I've heard that story before, that they mimic the act of reading before they can do it. Where they'll turn the pages and they'll run their finger along the lines when they don't know what the words are.
Yeah, absolutely. I've never heard of anyone, although it's probably common, but I've never heard anyone talk about actually telling a story at the same time. But often children will memorize a book because in general kids want to hear the same books over and over and over. And then they will, sort of read, but it's really reciting. And then, at some point it flip switches and they realize, oh yeah, it actually does say it.
I imagine a lot of you have stories like that as well. That is just fascinating.
I'd love to hear some if you do have some.
Let's see here. Question number 9. What is the thinnest book on your shelf? Not at your shelves now, but
actually,
really thin.
I have a fair bit of poetry. I'm rather, unlike you, a fan of late 20th century American poetry, so I have quite a bit of that. The thinnest book in my book bag right now is called Ti Amo by Hannah Astrovik or something, Norwegian. Do you know this? It's a very thin. It's not It's not poetry. It's a novel or a memoirish novel, and it's quite thin and it's square. It's really beautiful. And I wish I could remember the name of the author, but it's a fascinating volume. But I've just been reading the very beginning of it, and it's...
Well, the next question, obviously, is the thickest book on your shelf. Back home. Do you have an unabridged Tale of Genji?
I do, although it may not be unabridged. Oh, and I think you talked about Clarissa.
It's done in the last 30 years. It's unabridged.
And I have Clarissa.
Oh, you have the Penguin Clarissa. That will do it.
Although I bought it very used, and it is now in 2, so technically it's 2 volumes.
Well, and it's Penguin's tricky because for a long time they also did an abridged Clarissa.
Yeah,
whereas
mine is not.
The Royal Tyler Tale of Genji, the Arthur Whaley Tale of Genji, the Side Sticker Tale of Genji, the Dennis Washburn Tale of Genji, they're all unabridged, so they're all gigantic.
So yes, I have one of those, although technically it's Abe's and not mine, but I count anything on his shelves as...
Which one is it?
The one with all the colors, vivid colors.
Is there a person on the cover?
I haven't read it. Yeah, there's a woman on the cover.
Okay, that's the Washburn translation. Which the paperback has an excellent blurb.
So I've heard. Unfortunately, we have the hardback. He has the hardback, which he stores at home, not where he lives. It might be a suitable boy.
Oh yeah, do you have the beautiful trade paperback?
I do.
The publisher did a beautiful reprint of the trade paperback.
Might have actually been from you.
You could easily have filched it from here. People walk off with books all the time here. Once upon a time, for 15 years, I would invite guests over here and I would say, you are welcome to steal books, but I'd much rather that you leave with a certain basset home. And they never did. And there was no mystery as to why they never did either. But anyway, you've already been liberally screamed at here today. So,
I don't think Frida would be easy to get out of here without
No, she'd put up a fight.
Yeah.
Whereas my little, I had a basset hound for a long time. Those of you who don't know, she's in my earliest videos, and she wouldn't have known. She wouldn't have noticed she was living somewhere else. It wouldn't. She wasn't the sharpest knife in the desk drawer. But anyway, question number 11: do you write as well as read? Do you consider yourself to be an author?
Yeah.
I have a book by you on my shelf.
Say it again.
I have a book with your name on it on my shelf.
So I write a few book reviews. I've written a couple of academic books, and I'm working on a memoir that I think might be a book. So yeah, I think of myself as a writer, although I haven't written in months. I tried a little bit today, actually.
Did you indeed? Do you fancy yourself getting back to reviewing, to writing reviews? Those of you who don't watch Hannah's channel, her husband was fatally ill. And those of you who have been through that, it consumes your whole life. The rest of your world goes away. And then you decide, when it's all over, judging a lot of times by the nature of how it happened, you decide, are you going to step just back into your old life, or are you going to have a different life? So it's a legitimate question. Do you see yourself getting back to reviewing?
I see myself getting back to reviewing this year.
Lots more writing, not just reviewing, maybe?
A lot more writing, because I promised David that we were working on this book together, and I promised him I would spend this year with it as my main priority.
And the working title is Steve is Great? Are we sticking with that?
We'll stick with that.
That's good. It's got a tang to it. Let's see here. Question number 12. When did you get into reading? It's going to be another one just like the last big brain that did this question. It's going to be ab ovo. I was just waiting when you were talking about how David was reading from Harry Potter when Abe was just a tiny baby. I was waiting for you to say, and the next week he pointed at Shakespeare. Brainy people, I swear. It had to be really early, right? It has to be some of your earliest memories. Yeah. I'm sure that you were running your finger along the
not reading. I remember my parents reading to me, but I know they continued to read to me, until my dad did, until he died.
So enviable.
But my mother, actually, just because I read early doesn't, as you know, you can start reading later. You can start choosing to read later in large amounts and still read more than anybody else alive has ever read. But my mother didn't learn to read until she was in the 4th grade, and she became an English teacher, so, it just doesn't...
Wow.
It really doesn't matter when you start.
No, it doesn't matter, but for you literally can't remember a time when books weren't a part of your life. Mm-hmm. Wow. That is so amazing.
And my kid learned to read really early, too, and interestingly, he spoke really late. He could sign a bit, because I both speak and sign, but he really didn't speak at all. And then it was about 6 months between when he learned how to really speak a lot and when he learned to read. And that was maybe the hardest 6 months of our life, because like having to talk constantly. And as much as I enjoyed spending the time with him, I wanted some not talking times. So reading was a nice way to have a little bit of...
The Donahue children talked often and early. In case you're wondering if the past is any prologue to the present. Okay, question number 13. What is your favorite classic book? And here, let's leave behind BookTube's usual definition of that word as anything earlier than when you opened your Twitter account, and let's say anything earlier than the 19th century.
Okay. I'll go with actual classic. I can name
or
a couple.
The classics of ancient Greece. No, I don't even
I'll
dream
name a couple
about that
of I think from the time I was a teenager, Antigone was one of my very favorite plays.
Wow.
I took her as a model in both good ways and bad ways.
Now, is this always in an English language translation?
Always English language.
Do you remember who?
No, I don't. I remember...
It had to be Robert Fitzgerald.
It might have been Fitzgerald. By the time I read The Odyssey, I guess the first time I read the Odyssey, it was Fitzgerald, and then Fagel came in, and I certainly have Fagel's Antigone on my shelf now, um, but it would have been way before that. It was probably
a world different
Fitzgerald.
between them.
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
a world of difference
Yeah.
between the two.
But
Antigone, the
that-
characters are talking the way you understand characters to talk. Just are. They're just people on the stage.
And I think that tension between doing what was moral and doing what was legal was such an issue in my family. Both my parents were involved in the civil rights movement, and so that talk, they had never talked about the classics with me, but when I did read that story, which I mean, not play, it's not a story, but it just felt like
it was
a conversation.
hugely popular during
It
the
felt
civil
like a
rights movement.
conversation.
Everybody carried a copy with them. So that's all it's about. It's about civil disobedience, basically.
And for the other classic, now I really love Sappho, and especially Anne Carson's fascinating translation, just because of the game and some of the same puzzles that I find in late 20th century poetry. I see Anne Carson sort of creating out of having the fragments of Sappho and trying to. So it's a game.
I was about to say, yes, Anne Carson is not free of guilt, but of course that's not how you're thinking about it.
Yep.
Well, let's just move on. In school, was your best subject language arts / English?
That's kind of an interesting question. I think looking back, I would say absolutely. I think that's where my natural ways of thinking are. And in fact, the kind of history that I was interested in and majored in college was so radically different from the history I took in high school that history certainly wouldn't have been. But I think that the sort of language arts skills were what led me into social.
But it sounds like you've got a butt in there.
But I went to a school where all of my teachers had at least until my senior year, had very rote ways of judging literature and thinking that all reasonable questions about literature were not about analysis or interpretation, but were about correct answers. And I didn't respond well to that. And those issues weren't there in chemistry or calculus so I think sometimes I felt more frustrated in English class.
There was a dissonance there on a subject you really liked, but the presentation.
Yes.
Oh,
yes.
That's
because
that must have been horrible.
My mom was an English teacher, and my father was someone who read just a tremendous amount. And so when I was at home, we talked about literature in one kind of way, which was full of a kind of joy and creativity, and not what are the right answers.
It's just making me feel a little guilty about all the dogma that's headed your way tonight. The evening, as any guest who's ever been over here can attest, is going to be full of right answers about literature, and they're all going to be mine by coincidence. Well, I guess that's why God invented wine, right?
It makes me a lot more patient.
All of these videos, I inevitably get mail from people saying, boy, when I watch a video like this, I wish I were at Hyde Cottage. And I honestly don't know why. It's always described as like a root canal. Let's just move on here. Let's see. If you were given a book as a present that you had read before and hated, what would you do?
It depends on the circumstances.
Is there any circumstance in which you would keep it on display?
No.
Merely for the feelings of the giver?
No.
No.
Well, I guess
what about
might
the
have
other
if
end?
David had given it to me, but other than that,
David doesn't count. No, I think
and I'd
this
get
means
rid of that one now. So.
this means a stranger, I think, or
no,
a well-meaning
yeah.
acquaintance.
If one of my pals gave it to me and said, "Here, I thought you would love this," I would probably laugh and talk about how much I hate it and just hand it back to them so they could return it. Or listen to them talk about why they loved it and perhaps give it a second chance, depending on how recently I read it and what they say.
Okay, but if you're talking about a pal that you could talk about this to, that doesn't count. What about a well-meaning distant acquaintance?
Yeah.
So on the one end of the spectrum, there's no circumstance in which you would keep it. just for
Right.
appearance's sake. On the other
I
end of
think
the
the
spectrum, with a
well-meaning-
well-meaning acquaintance, is there ever a
A
circumstance in which you would
well-meaning,
tell them
distant
that you
acquaintance,
don't?
I'd probably just thank them for the kindness of their gift and drop in a little free library or whatever. Because if they're a well-meaning acquaintance, they're probably not going to go check out my bookshelves.
You'd hope not.
Or probably
You'd
not
hope
be
not.
in my house. Even,
I've had people do that, but you always hope that it won't happen.
I can always say it's upstairs in H. So.
Yeah, it's the height of rudeness. Okay? In case any of you are listening who might be tempted to be guilty, you give a present, it's gone. You don't have any say over it anymore.
You don't have any
So-
say, but actually, I'm remembering you saying at some point that gifts should be about the interests of the receiver.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure I 100% agree with that. I think it's the gifts that have mattered the most to me, both books and otherwise, have been things that have been about sharing something together. And
Well, okay, but not
um,
riding roughshod.
not,
I'm talking
right,
about the
yeah,
kinds of,
yeah,
I like this,
right.
I don't care what you think.
Right, but also not, I'm giving you what you asked for because you asked for it, but I'm sharing something that I love that, I really know
That's
you
true.
will. Or
I'm
think
thinking of
you will.
nightmare scenarios that I've been
Yes.
through. But you're right.
I may have been luckier.
Although I should point out that now is the time to get all of the "I'm not quite sure I agree with yous" out of your system. Now is the time to get rid of those.
Uh-huh. Oh, we'll just wait for the modern art discussions later tonight.
Sweet. Let's see here. What is a lesser-known series that you know that is similar to Harry Potter or the Hunger Games? The original creator of this tag was a tween.
Series and then, actually, I have an answer.
You might have something similar. You haven't read Hunger Games.
I have not read Hunger Games.
And
but
you
I
haven't
have
read
heard about
Battle
it.
Royale.
No.
Right.
But I have an answer. And to say it's similar is because it involves sort of young people and adventures, and it's a series, and that's Swallows and Amazons.
Oh.
The Arthur Ransom
Okay.
books. I first ran across Swallows and Amazons in the local library when Abe was teeny. And I don't know why I picked it up. I have no idea why, because it doesn't seem like the kind of book I would pick up. But I did, and loved it. And then when Abe got older, he was obsessed with them. And at that point, they'd been newly republished. And so there were these lovely matching volumes. And
Was Arthur
he-
Ransom an influence on J.K. Rowling? I can't remember. I've read a few interviews. I can't remember.
I don't know.
I mean, she must have read the books.
I assume so. But there are these books about these two sets of kids who have real adventures that kids today would not have. They live on a little tiny island, which basically their parents can see, but they live there all summer, and they're sailing around lakes and stuff and not seeing their parents for weeks, and feeding themselves, etc. And so there's that, but then there's also this, which is a very domestic kind of adventure, but then there's also imagination, that they're imagining all of these pirate adventures and things. And then they have this huge sailboat race with the two sets of friends, the one family and the other family. They have this huge sailboat race, and they're fighting so hard to win. They're trying everything they can possibly do. But then as the second it ends, they're cheering each other on so much and appreciating how much fun it was to have that race and how well the other side did, and in both cases, and it's such a different feeling from what I gather the Hunger Games was.
Also sounds a lot less vindictive than Quidditch.
Yes, even Quidditch.
But definitely a precursor. That
Yes.
counts.
And Abe loved those books when he got a little older. The first real thick book that wasn't a picture book or whatever was Swallows and Amazons. And partly because of their boat life, he has just bought a boat to live on next year, a houseboat.
Wow.
So he's going to be living out.
He's going to be living out part
His-
of that. Oh, wow. I hope he knows the headaches of a houseboat.
I think he has some clue, but we'll see.
Well, the next question is about booktubing. What is a bad habit you always do while filming? You want to go up there, baby? Go up you go. Up you go.
Exactly what I'm doing now, which is blank and pause and try to figure out what to say.
The question raises the possibility of rambling. But is there anything else?
I tend not to ramble a whole lot because I usually, unless I'm trying to speak live to somebody, because I just stop and try to figure out what I'm going to say and think through it. And I try really hard not to move as I'm pausing. And so then I make a little cut in the video and edit out that.
Oh wow!
Pause.
Is that a little
So
technique?
often,
you try not to move because the moving gives it away.
Well, I mean, you can still tell, but at least it's not quite as horrendous.
I don't do edits on my video because every word I say is precious.
Because you can talk off the cuff.
Can I ever? You wait till the wine's broken out. I'll be talking off the cuff for a long time. but baby girl, constantly upstaged by my little dog. Anything else? Any other bad habits that you have while filming? Are you a taskmaster for yourself when you make videos? If you make a small flub, do you insist on stopping?
No, I edit it out often.
Do you have a problem psyching yourself up for a video?
I didn't until very recently, and now after having pretty much of a break.
Yeah, the break will do it.
It's a little bit.
I've heard. It doesn't do it for me, but I've heard from other people.
It's a little complicated to figure out how to come back of just saying, oh, okay, so now we're back to books, and that's.
Oh yeah, no, it is complicated.
So I may be a little slow. Mm-hmm. I think my other bad habit has become a bad habit is that I love reading my comments, but I haven't been able to deal with them very recently. And I have to get back in the habit of doing that because this last video I could have easily, and somehow I didn't. And I'm not.
Well, it'll come back.
Yeah, I hope so.
It'll come back with you.
And right now there's just so much paperwork and stuff that's my excuse for why I didn't do it. But I could have done it. And I so love reading the comments. It's not like I'm not.
I do not understand the attitude of the rest of the internet, where the standard dictum is don't look at the comments. Don't look at the comments. Wish I could get rid of the comments. That sort of thing. Don't understand that at all.
Clearly not a booktube thing. I mean, there are definitely people who are better at responding
it's not a booktube
or whatever. But I think everybody is thrilled to be getting them and reading them.
So the next question is, what is your favorite word? And here you have the honor of all of the previous recipients of this tag on the line because none of them chose the right word.
I love the word defenestration.
Okay, that's the fourth vote for defenestration. The correct answer is Steve. The correct answer is Steve. I wouldn't think that would be very hard. It's mellifluous. Flows right off the tongue. Defenestration. We have another vote for defenestration.
And my son had a word that was his favorite for ages that had to do with smashing pumpkins or something. But I can't remember what the word was at all. If any of you know what I'm talking about, or Abe, if you watch.
You don't mean the music band. The word you're not thinking of hipster.
No.
Okay.
It's a long Latinate word.
All right. Well, the next question is: are you a nerd, a dork, a dweeb, or all of the above?
Oh, I'm a nerd, and I've always identified as a nerd. But 5 years ago, nerd had a new meaning for me. That nerd means no evidence of residual disease. And so in the oncology world. And so I am a 5-year nerd, as well as being a lifetime nerd.
I've completely forgotten about that. Yeah, it does have a secondary meaning. Some of you will know that meaning.
I think more people use NED, N-E-D, for no evidence of a disease. But
yeah, NED is the older one.
Yeah. But my doc was like, no evidence of residual disease for you.
Okay, we've got a barrage of things here that aren't going to help any. Next question is vampires or fairies, and why?
Fairies. I love those photographs from the early 1900s, the British
The
cousins.
Coddington fairies?
Yes, that's it. Um, yeah,
But you weren't taken in by them. You just
I
loved
wasn't taken in by them. Well, actually, I don't think I had even heard of them until the little old ladies who had been the young cousins came out in the 1980 or whatever, saying it was all a hoax. But yeah.
as inevitably happens.
But the technological and the idea that people could fall for it was because of differences in technology. So it was like this really fascinating historical.
It inevitably
change.
happens. Hoaxes and stuff like that. The Piltdown Man, the Coddington Fairies, the Loch Ness Monster. I will point out here for the home team that the Patterson-Gimlin film of Bigfoot, both people went to their graves maintaining that it was real. It did not happen with the Patterson-Gimlin film.
So people can be wrong.
Then we have spirits or werewolves.
Depends on what kind of spirits you mean, I suppose. So in Eudora Welty, her story Why I Live at the PO, I'm not sure she uses spirits. She might just use chemicals, but the uncle who drinks like a fish might be drinking spirits. But she might not use that word. But no, I think I really like spirits when it doesn't mean actual ghosts, but is referring to this sort of embodied way of talking about memory. So yeah, I'll vote for spirits.
All right.
Like in
Zombies
Beloved
or vampires?
Or Hamlet or zombies or vampires. Do I have to answer this one? I don't have any answers.
I want to point out here,
Oh.
I don't mean to be Mr. Killjoy, none of these things are real. I want to make sure we know that. None of these things are real.
So
they're all fictional creations. All of them are.
So I haven't read it, but for years, my son has loved Abraham Lincoln Vampire Killer or Slayer or Hunter or whatever.
You've read Dracula.
I've read Dracula, but I don't love Dracula, so I'm not.
And you haven't, I would guess you haven't read World War Z.
I've read World War Z.
You have.
And I liked it even less than I liked Dracula, but my kid dressed as a vampire for, Abraham Lincoln Vampire Slayer wasn't as a vampire. So I'll give the vote to vampires.
And then the next question is love triangle or forbidden love?
Oh, love triangles. I especially like them when they become like love pentagrams or whatever, like in Thomas Hardy. But they're good in Shakespeare too. Yeah, I'm rather a fan of love triangles.
We're on the doorstep of Garb August. I am going with forbidden love. Some of my choices in Garb August are going to be extremely forbidden.
And I'm not 100% sure I have time to do as much as I'd like in Garb August, but if I get to Garb August, it will be to read some lesbian pulp fiction that involves love triangles. Although forbidden love too, I guess, at that point.
And the last question. 45 minutes, good. Full-on romance books or action-packed with a few love scenes mixed in?
I hate action, so I guess full-on romance. Although I haven't really read much real romance either, so...
Sounds like you could stand to read some action for Garb August.
Let's see.
Perhaps some recommendations are in order.
Yeah. You can give me recommendations.
Well, there you go, BookTube. That is the ultimate book tag, complete with the Bean, who was on camera, then off, then on again. So I'll upload this now. Who knows? We might make another video. But in the meantime, I hope you all have a wonderful evening. We're going to wrap this up now. You'll be seeing Hannah again on her channel. You'll, of course, be seeing me on mine. So I'll see you then.
Thank
you, BookTube.